Thanks for joining us for this look at some of the best stories from KPBS News this week. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Coming up, the excessive amount of overtime pay for San Diego police. KPBS investigates how some officers are now among the highest paid city workers and what that means for public safety. Young science careers threatened by federal spending cuts. See how the Trump administration is affecting students pursuing a doctorate at CSU San Marcos. And the numbers are in for this year's point-in-time homeless count. We focus on North County, where some communities saw some of the biggest changes. We start with the private jet crash that damaged homes in Tierra Santa early on Thursday morning. The investigation will continue this weekend. So will the response for the dozens of people who were forced to evacuate their neighborhood. Jacob Ayer has more on the local support.
I heard something loud, and I look outside, and honestly, the sky was just orange. And I start seeing like fireballs, like explosions, like small explosions going on, and we were like, what's going on?
Will Martinez was just down the road from the crash site at a chapel after evacuating around 4 a.m. this morning with his loved ones. He says once they got outside, they saw people running down the street.
We actually helped out a family. It was a mother, 2 children, and their dog. We gave them blankets, we gave them jackets, and gave her a hoodie because she ran out of her house. Her car was gone. Her car was totaled. It melted with the flames from the plane crash.
He says his house and family are okay.
I've been in the Navy for almost 14 years. She's been in for about 15. Never had something happen like this before. Terrifying.
Husband and wife Zachary Adams and Nicole Morehouse are both active duty Navy officers. They also evacuated from their home this morning with their 4 children. He says the neighborhood's tight community bonds and military background was helpful during the aftermath of the crash.
Every other neighbor that was awake at that point started going door to door. Everyone was waking everyone up. It's a lot like we do it on the ship when there's an emergency, and all how we train. Just make sure everyone's awake and up and ready to fight the fire.
Adams says he's grateful for his family's safety and the support they're receiving.
Pizza's been provided, Lunchables been provided for the kids, diapers, water, beverages of all kinds. Basically a lot of necessities. I've seen soaps and detergents and whatnot, canned food. I mean, anything that we would need in an emergency has been provided.
Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
We have several stories on the crash at kpbs.org, and that's also where we will post any updates that are announced by investigators. Another San Diego community is still waiting to recover from disaster. 16 months after last year's flooding in South Crest, dozens of lawsuits are piling up against the city. Alexander Nguyen catches up with one of the plaintiffs.
Jessica Calix says before the flood, this South Crest neighborhood was a tight-knit community.
I miss this neighborhood. Just walking over here now, I saw, one of my neighbors from next door, from the flood. When we were all such a tight community. There would be hawks, and they would catch mice.
She says she felt at home here and loves the diversity of the neighborhood, but she hasn't been able to move back.
I woke up that morning, and by the time I went to bed, everything was gone.
After the flood, her landlord raised the rents, and a lot of homes and apartments here have not been rebuilt. She now lives in a travel trailer with her son. It's been more than a year since the flood devastated this community, and walking around, you can still see signs of recovery. Calix is now part of a lawsuit against the city, alleging it failed to maintain Joyous Creek by removing trash and debris, leading to the devastating flood.
Because there needs to be accountability for this preventable disaster. The infrastructure that's been neglected for years needs to be finally taken care of. But we need positive change in our communities.
The city is facing 53 lawsuits that a San Diego Superior Court judge has combined into a mass tort with more than 1,500 plaintiffs. Calix says suing is the only way to get the support the community needs. She says homeowners, renters, and landlords are still recovering, overwhelmed with debts, and the infrastructure here has not been repaired.
We don't feel supported by our government officials, and the whole experience is extremely dehumanizing, and it's very discouraging.
The concern now is how the city's budget woes will affect the lawsuits going forward. Alexander Nguyen, KPBS News.
The San Diego Police Department has, for years, struggled to retain officers and hire new ones. The result? Its overtime budget ballooned. KPBS investigative reporter Scott Rott says some officers work so much overtime that they're now the highest paid city employees.
San Diego's police chief for many years made the most money in the department, but something changed about a decade ago. Cops were leaving the department and those vacancies weren't being filled. So officers started working more overtime.
A lot of overtime, like thousands of hours of overtime.
Paul Parker is the former executive director of San Diego's Civilian Police Oversight Commission. He worked as a police officer and death investigator for decades.
That I don't understand unless they're on some kind of special assignment, but even then, thousands of hours of overtime seems to be excessive.
Take, for example, Officer Jason Costanza. A KPBS investigation found he worked over 3,000 hours of overtime in 2023. The year with the most recently available data. That's equivalent to adding another full-time job plus another part-time job on top of his regular police duties. For Parker, that's a red flag.
I can speak from experience. When you work excessive number of hours, and 19 hours seems to be completely excessive, but when you're working 14, 16-hour days, and then you put a couple of those days back to back, or maybe every other day you're working 14 to 16, you're exhausted. You're absolutely exhausted.
Costanza had to work very long hours to hit that overtime total. We're talking 17-hour shifts, sometimes 19-hour shifts, with short breaks in between. He earned over $400,000 in 2023, the majority of it from overtime pay. That made him the city's highest paid employee. A KPBS analysis of department data found Costanza was among several officers who earned hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime pay in recent years, and it's mostly the same group, year after year. The department's skyrocketing overtime budget is one concern. There's also the issue of officer well-being and public safety.
You have to consider that these folks are armed and they're tasked with making split-second decisions to save their lives and the lives of the members of the community.
There's research to back up these concerns. Studies and audits show fatigued officers are more likely to face complaints from civilians, and overtime can result in more use of force incidents.
Officers who are particularly tired are they're less able, they're less likely to de-escalate. They're less able to kind of manage crisis encounters or interact with people who might be impaired in some way.
Lois James is director of the Sleep and Performance Research Center at Washington State University, Spokane. James has worked with police departments around the country. She understands that overtime gives departments flexibility, but relying on it too much can cost cities more money in the long run.
It's what we call the fatigue tax. It's easy for it to get into this vicious spiral.
Working tons of overtime can lead to burnout, which means officers taking sick leave or time off, which means more shifts to fill. There's also the public safety risk of fatigued officers making mistakes on duty. That can result in costly lawsuits or settlements. San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall says he isn't bothered by the huge amounts of money officers are making in overtime.
They put in a tremendous amount of hours. They earn the money that they've made. And they're committed to putting in that time.
And he pushed back on the notion that excess overtime increases the risk of negative interactions between his officers and the public.
I don't think that the right way to answer that is to give you a yes or a no. I think there are so many factors that depend.
Wall says he isn't aware of any complaints against the officers working the most overtime hours.
If they're not out there being respectful, treating people right, making good decisions, then they're going to be pulled back from working overtime.
But the chief says he is open to imposing some limits on overtime.
We do need to have some guardrails in place.
He supports capping shifts at 16 hours with a required 8-hour break. He also supports mandating 1 day off a week. But those changes would need to go through what's called a meet and confer process with the police officers union, which can take months. In the long term, Wall says the department needs to redouble its efforts at hiring and recruiting new officers. Scott Rodd, KPBS News.
A white actress is suing the San Diego County Library for not allowing her to portray Black civil rights icons. Katie Heisen says it's one of a wave of lawsuits across the country claiming discrimination against a majority group.
Annette Hubble wrote a one-woman show. She portrays historical figures, white like herself, and Black.
It never occurred to me that that might even be an issue.
She says Rancho Santa Fe Library asked her to perform her show for Women's History Month. She gave them a list of characters to pick from. They chose Harriet Beecher Stowe, a white abolitionist, Mary McLeod Bethune, Black civil rights leader, and Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery and rescued others. A couple weeks before the show, they asked Hubble to swap out Bethune and Tubman for white characters.
And I said, why? And they said, she said, because it's not appropriate for you to be doing this. You're a white woman. And I said, oh, no. You don't understand. I'm honoring these women. And she said, that doesn't matter. And I said, you mean I'm only to perform women whose stories of bravery and courage that should be told if they're white? And she said, that's pretty much it. So I'm not getting it. So I said, well, tell me how this is different from the Hamilton play.
In Hamilton, non-white actors portray white historical figures. The debate escalated to the library's diversity and inclusion team. They affirmed the decision, but Hubble refused to swap out the characters, so the library canceled her performance. The library said it won't comment on pending legal matters. Hubble doesn't use makeup for her characters.
I think if people thought I was doing blackface or a parody of these people, not respecting them, then that might be a cause for an objection. But all they have to do is read my stories and they would see how deeply I respect and honor and admire these people.
The San Diego Union-Tribune published an opinion piece by a former San Diego city attorney supporting her, and a lawyer from the Pacific Legal Foundation read it.
And they called me and said, this is horrific. I think that was the very word that Chris used. We need to do something about this.
Hubble says he convinced her to sue.
If these women that I portray fought against such injustice and such egregious wrongdoings in their lives, who am I to stop at fighting this?
Pacific Legal Foundation says it fights for individual liberties. It's filed suits against implicit bias training, race quotas for licensing boards, and programs meant to close racial opportunity gaps. I asked Hubble's lawyer, Chris Barnewalt.
The government simply doesn't have the right to exclude anyone by race.
Is there a hope with any of these cases that it might set legal precedent?
For sure. We do this because we're interested in the impact.
So-called reverse discrimination suits stretch back to at least the 1970s. Recently, high-profile cases have made headlines again, like the Supreme Court ruling against considering race in college admissions. And in San Diego, after a white plaintiff sued, the city removed the race requirement from a program meant to help people of color buy their first home. Dan Eaton is a legal analyst. He says these lawsuits rely on laws enacted after slavery and the civil rights movement.
The impetus of these laws was to address the legal discrimination against particularly formerly enslaved individuals who were African Americans.
But the reasons a law was written don't really matter in a court of law, only what the words say.
And what we are seeing as the law has evolved is the application of these laws or constitutional amendments, as the case may be, to claims by members of the majority.
Interesting to see that all be turned on its head.
Angie Chandler has advised arts institutions across the country, including in San Diego. She's also played Harriet Tubman.
Even as a Black woman, it was one of the most difficult roles I've ever had to play.
And she'd love to play Mary McLeod Bethune, whose body, she says, was central to her experience.
A woman over 200 pounds, dark-skinned Black woman living in the 1800s and 1900s in this country. There is not a way that I can even invite you into what it's like to walk around this country in a similar body in 2025.
She says Hubble's performance is not the same as the colorblind casting in Hamilton.
It's not a two-way street because Colorblindness is a response. Colorblindness is a response to historic exclusion, to the erasure of our stories.
And she says it ignores the harmful history of white people portraying people of color.
The foundation of the American arts movement means that it will never be as simple, innocent, and neutral for a white person to attempt to tell or perform the story of a Black person.
This is her.
Under the letter of the law, that may not matter. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
Make sure you sign up for our newsletters and get a list of our most popular stories. And here are some from this week. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria's ADU proposal would block housing in San Diego's whitest and wealthiest neighborhoods. Montgomery Field Airport weather instruments were not functioning properly at the time of the plane crash in Tierra Santa. And ICE agents swarm a San Diego immigration court, arresting people after their hearings. The Department of Homeland Security is terminating protections for thousands of Afghan refugees effective July 12th. Matthew Bowler says many Afghans living in San Diego are now at risk of being sent back.
Desperate Afghan civilians were fleeing for their lives about 3.5 years ago. Many were granted temporary protected status, or TPS, to stay in the United States. It's a special form of deportation protection for people from countries experiencing war or other dangerous conditions. Now, the Trump administration may be sending those refugees back to Afghanistan. In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said, quote, Afghanistan has had an improved security situation, and its stabilizing economy no longer prevent them from returning to their home country. In an interview on KPBS Radio's Midday Edition, Sean Van Diver from the San Diego-based organization Afghan EVAC says that during Trump's first term, the president appeared to be very supportive of Afghan refugees.
I thought that surely President Trump would protect this bipartisan, beloved effort to help allies who have stood beside us. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was an unintended consequence, it seems like, is a deliberate strategy to throw our wartime allies under the bus and cause real irreparable harm to our veterans community.
Van Diver says about 200,000 Afghans have resettled in the United States since 2021. An estimated 11,700 Afghan nationals in the U.S. currently hold TPS, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Matthew Bowler, KPBS News.
You can hear the full interview with Sean Van Diver from Afghan EVAC on the KPBS Midday Edition podcast. You can listen at kpbs.org, the KPBS YouTube page, or wherever you get your podcasts. Cuts at federal agencies are having wide-ranging impacts here in San Diego County, and that includes workforce development programs at CSU San Marcos. KPBS education reporter Katie Anasta says the programs help students pursue research and doctorate degrees.
We have almost 160 or a little over 160 students that are either got their PhDs or in the pipeline to get their PhDs.
The Center for Training, Research, and Educational Excellence at CSU San Marcos supports students from community college to master's programs.
And what we do mostly is help students gain experience that will allow them the opportunities to go to grad school.
That experience includes doing research with faculty members, attending conferences, and taking a weekly professional development class.
We are a majority of first and low-income students, and so all these programs gave students stipends, and so that allowed them to do research in labs and allowed them then to go on to grad school, because that is what makes the difference is in your grad school application.
4 of the center's programs were federally funded through grants from the National Institutes of Health. They cut funding suddenly this spring, starting with URISE, the Undergraduate Research Initiative for Scientific Enhancement.
We found out that one was cut on the end of March, and then every week thereafter we would get another termination. Until they all got terminated.
The NIH told university officials that the terminations were due to changes in their priorities. In a notice about changes to one of the grants, the NIH wrote that its policy is, quote, not to prioritize research programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Garcia says the loss of funding meant 45 students went without pay for more than a month. Nicholas Mendez is in the URISE program. He's studying psychology and biology.
To not be certain about what your paycheck is going to look like and how long you'll get the stipends for. It's very intimidating because we all have so much to lose, and we all have so much that we want to gain, not for ourselves, but just to give back to the community.
Mendez has done research on nicotine addiction and weight loss medications, and he hopes to go into drug development. He says the stipends allow him to focus on research rather than an off-campus job.
Originally, I worked a restaurant job, and then I decided that I wanted to be more on campus because it was easier for me to kind of stay in the groove and be more productive if I was already on campus.
The financial aid office found enough grants and other sources to pay students April and May stipends. Now the school is trying to fundraise so that 13 students, including Mendez, who are halfway through their 2-year programs, can finish them. He says it's helped him pay for gas money and not worry about buying lunch at conferences.
It really just gives me the freedom to be a student and a researcher without having to worry about all the little nitpicky things that I might have to budget in.
In the meantime, Garcia says the center will continue to provide as much support to students as they can. Katie Anastas, KPBS News.
Nearly 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. KPBS health reporter Heidi DeMarco says a UC San Diego study is trying to find out why and whether lifestyle changes could help prevent it.
Women Inflammation and Tau study is tracking how lifestyle factors like sleep quality, diet, and activity might drive up inflammation, and how it may be linked to Alzheimer's disease.
Along with how maybe sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone might impact that too, we might be able to understand how best to intervene to improve things which will actually have a cognitive benefit to women.
Sarah Banks is a neuropsychologist who is co-leading the study. So far, the early data found that how women sleep may be a risk factor.
That sleep apnea is this under-recognized, highly treatable component that might be driving some of the memory problems in Alzheimer's disease.
A surprising 70% of women in the study had undiagnosed sleep apnea. Erin Sunderman is a cognitive neuroscientist who co-leads the study. She says that sleep disruption can lead to higher levels of tau in the brain, especially in women with a genetic risk for Alzheimer's.
Tau pathology is a buildup of abnormal tau protein that leads to the memory deficits that we see in Alzheimer's disease. Women tend to have more tau, and we are trying to understand why, and we think inflammation might be a culprit.
A family history of dementia and Alzheimer's made joining the study personal for 76-year-old Sharon Lee.
I eat pretty well, and I try to exercise just not my body, but also my brain, do new things and, keep active.
Participants commit to multiple clinic visits over 2 years.
They do imaging, they do blood draws, lumbar punctures, cognitive testing.
Participants get health feedback, a cognitive score, and a copy of their brain scan. The researchers hope their findings can lead to better prevention, especially if everyday habits like sleep, diet, or exercise turn out to play a big role. They are looking for 50 more women over 65 to join.
We hope to get a diverse group of women in that reflect the population so that our results can help to generalize to not just one specific demographic group, but to women in general.
It's a commitment, but one that researchers say could unlock answers for generations to come. Heidi DeMarco, KPBS News.
This week, numbers were released from this year's point-in-time count of the local homeless population. Most local cities saw fewer unsheltered people, but one area sticks out. Jacob Ayer says some of the biggest changes were in North County.
It's a milestone moment. Homelessness across San Diego County declined by 7% compared to last year. That's according to new data from the annual point-in-time count, a one-day snapshot count done annually in late January by the Regional Task Force on Homelessness.
And it's always good to see the number go down.
Paul Armstrong is Chief of Staff at San Diego Rescue Mission, which operates the Oceanside Navigation Center. He says many North County cities are now going beyond numbers and using names to humanize each person experiencing homelessness.
So the by name list is a best practice. And basically that is, do I actually know the names of the people that are experiencing homelessness in my city? And the more effective you are with a by name list, the more impact you can have.
Outside the city of San Diego, some of the largest declines in homelessness were seen in cities like Carlsbad, Encinitas, and Oceanside. Greg Angel is CEO of Interfaith Community Services, which operates in those areas.
Oceanside and Carlsbad each secured state grants to address encampments, and they worked with providers like Interfaith Community Services and others to create by name lists of individuals experiencing homelessness in those communities, and then work together to help those folks get off the streets.
He says the key in North County is collaboration between cities, nonprofits, and the county, and that encampment bans and enforcement alone won't reduce homelessness.
We need more places for people to go. Part of the reason why we've seen a decrease in unsheltered homelessness in North County is that in the last year, more of those places have opened. Treatment programs, recuperative care programs, navigation centers.
If we look back into the past few years, the total homelessness count for San Diego County is still close to record highs, and senior homelessness continues to rise.
As the cost of housing has continued to increase, the fixed income levels of people with disabling conditions has not increased. The fixed income levels of seniors living on a retirement income have not increased.
But this is the first time homelessness in San Diego County has declined in the post-pandemic era. And by that measure, there are some signs of hope for further improvement in the future. Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
And that'll do it for us. We hope that you enjoyed this look at KPBS News this week. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Thanks for joining us.